Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chapter Two's Talent Ed podcast. It's my pleasure to welcome Charlotte Curley to the show today. Charlotte has a wealth of experience across talent acquisition and has worked both agency and in-house for some amazing companies like Rolls-Royce, PA Consulting, and Octopus Investments. Charlotte shares her insight and experience and lets us know her thoughts on the current climate, the counter-offer culture, the great resignation, and how the control now sits with the candidate, as well as telling us her experiences with employer branding and tech talent tools that she would recommend at this point. To understand more about Charlotte's experience and how she would plan for 2022 and beyond. Okay, so a huge thank you to one of my favourite guests so far, Charlotte Curley, who I have been working with, alongside, known of for quite a long time now, and I've been asking you regularly to come and join us on our Talent Ed podcast, and I finally worn you down and you're here. So thank you so much for coming along. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. So Charlotte is a very experienced talent acquisition professional, slightly different to kind of normal guests that we have on the show, just in that you have worked for some very large companies and sort of those slightly more corporate enterprises, as opposed to startups or scale ups who we've been speaking to more recently. But with everything in the market as it is at present, and I think everybody experiencing very similar things in terms of challenges, etc., I thought you'd be the perfect guest to have on. So I wanted to sort of start by handing over to you, Charlotte, just to tell us a little bit about your career so far, where you've been, what you've done. I know you've kind of worn many hats, in terms of agency, in-house, etc. So just to tell us a bit about that as an intro.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. You've built me up, so here it goes. So yeah, absolutely. I started my recruitment career, as many do, in agency. So IT, tech, recruitment. Did that for a number of years before moving in-house with Alexander Mann on site at Rolls-Royce. So I joined there as a resource specialist to, again, focus on tech, global IT, and then ultimately ended up looking after all of corporate functions. So did that for a couple of years and then moved in-house to work directly for Rolls-Royce. So went over and worked for them. When I was there, I was looking at exec resourcing, so exec talent acquisition, and hiring kind of the most senior talent, and also some project work as well. So got involved with a little bit of designing e-learning modules and things like that, which then led me to PA Consulting, where we first met. I was talent acquisition manager, looking after early careers, corporate recruitment, recruitment marketing, and most of the recruitment operations. So ATS's website, all of that jazz, which was great. And that led me to Octopus as their recruitment operations manager. So whistle stop tour my career
through the years, and we won't say how long it was because we don't want to give away your age, but obviously you kind of gained a lot of experience in that time, and also across kind of a few pillars of recruitment, I suppose. So we obviously have spoken before, but I think a good place to start would potentially be to understand sort of, in your experience and your perception of how the market is currently versus, let's say 5-10 years ago, but also pre kind of pandemic time as well. What have you sort of seen as kind of some of the major changes during that period?
Sure. So I think now, and everybody I think is experiencing the same thing, that it's very, very much a candidate-driven market. So candidates have multiple offers on the table right now. I think that's no surprise to anybody. They're interviewing at lots and lots of different places. The speed at which you get through an interview process is more important now than ever. And that candidate experience, whilst I would argue it has always been important,
yeah,
I think now it can make or break people's decisions. Whereas in the past, there was probably a few less roles around, and maybe candidates were a little bit more forgiving with how the candidate experience has been. So I think that's certainly something we're seeing right now. We're seeing a lot more candidates are getting through the process and then getting to final offer, and they've got lots and lots of other offers on the table, or we've had a couple of candidates who will accept and then they'll accept something else and they'll kind of renege on your offer, which is again a real shame, but it's happening more and more at the moment. I think certainly in the past, I mean, maybe it was just how it felt, but it didn't feel as difficult. It didn't feel as competitive. There seemed to be more candidates available. You could advertise and maybe post and pray a little bit more and you might get the right candidates. Whereas now, if your job advert isn't quite up to scratch, you're not selling yourself as an employee, or maybe your career site isn't really selling you, it's more of a struggle. Certainly that's my perception of where we are right now trying to hire.
Yeah, we've absolutely had the same sort of feedback. I mean, clients that we're working with are talking about having to fill one role sometimes 3 times because of that counteroffer culture that everybody's talking about, and that sort of thing. And you've also got a target to hit, but then because of the higher levels of attrition that are going on in the background, it almost feels like a little bit like you're on a treadmill, and you just can't almost get to that point where you're hitting the target. So that's absolutely echoes, what we're hearing in the market. I think that poses a difficult question as well for many companies, however large or small, of how they then start to think about planning, strategic workforce planning for next year, 2023. Where do you start with that?
Yeah, it's incredibly tricky. Very timely as well, because we have been looking at this, and
really?
I may have mentioned it to you over the last couple of weeks, and I think part of the challenge is if you look back at your historic data, the last 18 months have kind of been a write-off, because we didn't have a lot of hiring, then we had a huge amount of hiring coming out of COVID. So to try and map what attrition might look like, or what your workforce plan should look like, it can be very difficult. What we have done is looked back, so pre-COVID, last year, this year, first half of the year for us, and looked at what those trends look like, what attrition looks like, what growth looks like in terms of the different departments, and then tried our best to map what we think the second half of the year is going to look like. Appreciating that actually it could continue like it is now and hiring is really booming, or it could quieten down. We're hoping maybe towards Christmas it quietens down again, but I expect a really, really big January and February for people moving, looking for new roles, and then ultimately that means we'll have to hire more people. So yeah, incredibly tricky, and I think it's difficult to get the workforce planning right, particularly in the climate right now. But it's a fun challenge to have.
And I suppose staying as close to it as you possibly can is maybe one of the key things, because like you say, you can't really predict, because it's such a period of uncertainty, and actually you might think something and have a lot of evidence or data to support that, but the way things are at the moment, it then could change suddenly. And so having the ability to kind of pivot as needed, I think a lot of companies are sort of striving for that and trying to find a model or a setup that allows them to do that. So I think as well that kind of comes onto the point about what you're saying with regards to career sites or visibility now, because the market is so competitive, and I think competitive is the perfect word for it. It is so competitive, and I think people are suddenly very aware that candidates in general have got, they've got the control potentially. They're looking for something a little bit more. They're digging a bit deeper into the benefits or the work-life balance or all of those things of companies, so that they can make the right choices for them. And it brings me on to the employer brand piece. So obviously I know that that's been something that you have always kind of championed. You were a judge at the RAD Awards last year. What's your thoughts on that? Where does that kind of sit in terms of order of importance at this point? Or
So I think in terms of your employer brand generally, I think so taking it back a few steps. So your employer brand is, what I suppose, how it feels, what people think of when they look at your brand. Do they aspire to work for you? All of those sort of things. Like, what is that culture like? So somebody who maybe doesn't work for you, how do they perceive your brand? So that's kind of how I interpret it, as from a candidate perspective.
Yeah.
So starting at the real basics, if you haven't got processes in place whereby you're responding to every single applicant that comes through, then that to me is really where you need to start. You need to look at the real basics. Are you replying to every single candidate, whether they're successful or whether it's a reject? And what reflection is that on your brand? Because if you're not, then that can be really damaging your employer brand before you've even set up great campaigns or have video content or have all the best marketing assets in the world. If you're not responding to people, then that's damaging you kind of in the background, I suppose.
Of course, yeah.
So I think getting the basics absolutely right, and looking at, are your recruiters all using the systems in the same way, which sounds really boring, but actually that's kind of what drives good performance, and that drives the good candidate experience. So get those right in the first place. And really, really basic things, I suppose, like every single touch point with a candidate, you could use that as an opportunity to push out a bit more content on your company. So some, life hack content, or maybe some little video clips if you have them, something like that. But every single touch point, ATS is now, you can automate that. You can keep pushing out some content which gets the candidate really engaged, keeps them engaged throughout the process, when they might be talking to lots and lots of different employers, but not all employers will be continually feeding them this extra information or exciting, engaging content. So I think getting those basics right is super, super important. And also a quick win when you're looking at like where to start on like creating employer brand content, I suppose. The next place for me is the careers site. Most candidates are going to go to a careers site, they're going to take a look. So think about how you're selling yourselves. Have you got on there examples of your current employees? Have you got video content if it's available? Are you selling your benefits? So lots of companies, I'm sure, have incredible benefits packages, but they're not outwardly promoting those. They're not talking about, what will we give you to join our organization? Not just what we want from you, but what are we prepared to offer, and what is that kind of deal, I suppose, and what's that going to look like? I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit here, but
no, absolutely. No, you're
one more on the website, and this is another thing that I've looked at over the years, but job adverts. If you're going out and you're trying to attract candidates to apply directly to you, you've really got to make that job ad stand out. More so nowadays, when lots and lots of job seekers will be scrolling, so they'll be looking on their phones, they'll be using their mobiles to look for jobs. If your job descriptions, your job adverts are really, really long, and you just post them without thinking about how that's going to be consumed, you're probably not going to get as much engagement or as many applicants as you could. And again, that's a real reflection of your brand, you as a company. How do you sell yourselves? How do you talk about yourselves? And if you can't sell the role in an advert, then why would somebody apply? And it might be a brilliant role, but you're just not selling it. So I think that's super, super important. And then on top of all of that, once you've got those basics, once you've got those foundations in place, then you can start to think about, campaigns and video content and some fun things you can do that really showcase your brand. But without those, I think you almost need to do the work beforehand and then build on top.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I was actually at a conference recently organised by the IHR, and one of the speakers from Reed was talking about feedback that they'd received via one of the surveys, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but the number of candidates that were feeding back that they had been ghosted, during the application process. And it was a really key talking point then, and all of the panelists were saying exactly the same thing. You can go out there with a very fancy kind of EVP and do all of the right content around it, and don't get me wrong, that is great and it's needed and it's very beneficial, but like you say, if they're not going to get a response from that employer, that candidate might be part of the future talent pool, if not the current talent pool, for a particular role, and so that's going to do far more damage than if you don't have a fancy video or whatever it is. So I think that's a really, really good and valid point, and maybe companies that, even more established companies as well, that are maybe getting ahead of themselves and they're trying to stand out and remain innovative and creative and all of those things, actually must make sure that they take a look back as well and think, right, are the foundations in place? Are we using the ATS as we should? Have we got touch points at every point that's needed? And then, see what impact that has as well. So no, completely agree. And then, so I suppose moving on from that point, you mentioned obviously candidates coming in, also maybe a younger generation of candidates coming in. We talk about millennials, Gen Z. I think even millennials now are sort of considered a bit older. I think we've moved on from millennials, but I think there's that, companies need to become or remain attractive to them. You've had a lot of experience with that. Tell us your thoughts on that. How can you implement an effective younger generation recruitment process?
So I think for early careers, and I suppose a good example of where I've developed a scheme or program, not on my own, I should add, lots and lots of people were involved, but when I was at PA, we were looking at how do we hire the best talent, first of all. So what is our campaign? What's our attraction campaign? But then how do we design and devise a program whereby we retain really, really brilliant graduate talent? And what we did there was we looked at historic data, and we looked at what we thought our challenge was in the early career space. And then we designed a program whereby we thought we could kind of tackle those challenges. Yeah. And what we decided to do is, young talent now is maybe, same as always, I suppose, not entirely sure where they want to specialise. There's lots and lots of options around there when you finish school, university. That could bring me on to a whole nother point about apprenticeships, but I'll stick on graduates for now. But the options are out there. There's lots and lots, and it can be quite overwhelming to know where you want to specialise. So what we decided to do is build a rotational grad scheme so that you can come into consulting where you might not necessarily know, where you want to focus for your career, and experience. You rotate around, you'll experience lots and lots of different client work. You'll specialise in different areas, and at the end of the scheme, you'll then decide where you want to specialise and kind of grow your career. So I suppose my observations on early talent now is that they want to not be bound into a career. Lots of people it's become kind of quite typical to job hop every 18 months and get that almost portfolio career. And if employers to think about how can you offer that within your organisation. So look at internal mobility. How do you offer a breadth of opportunity, but without your employees and your young talent feeling like actually they have to move. Yeah. So we created this scheme whereby you take 3 times and you get that experience and hopefully not looking to then move on quite so quickly, and you can see that you can build and develop and progress within one organisation, which is probably more of a mindset of generations before as opposed to now, but it was what can we do to really engage that and retain that talent, really.
And did that have a big impact on retention?
So I don't know yet. The scheme launched September 2021. We advertised in 2020, and then the first cohort joined in 21. So to be seen.
Watch this space.
Yeah, that was certainly the intention. But
I think that, to be honest as well, I think that is something, I mean, that can apply and be very successful in a really large company, but actually even for a smaller, startup, I'll use chapter 2 as an example. If grads were coming in now to our world, they could gain amazing experience in talent acquisition, employer brand, sales, implementation, a multitude of things, and we're at sort of 45 people, so that can only grow and grow. So I think potentially companies aren't thinking like that when they're bringing talent in, but actually what we're seeing, and the feedback that I hear a lot, is that now with everything so competitive, and especially within any kind of tech role, tech talent, anything like that as well, maybe people need to start, or companies need to start thinking about upskilling as well, and what are they investing in their existing staff, as well as thinking about attracting that future staff. And I think many people are thinking that, but I think it's a really good point. And you've obviously had a lot of experience in tech recruitment specifically, so I'm sure how competitive it is, and that was even going back a few years as well. But maybe that should be a priority for people moving forward. Let's look at who we've got already and how they can move internally, mobilize them internally, and upskill them internally.
Absolutely.
And so just having a think as well about things like, we talk about data insights in our world all the time, and we talk about sort of tech tools, and we talk about anything like that that's going to allow you to kind of get ahead and have a deeper knowledge of talent and where it sits and how you can find it and how you can be attractive to it. And you mentioned something to me about, when you worked all those years back at AMS, they were kind of quite forward thinking with that. How do you think that's evolved, and kind of how crucial do you think that is now in recruitment?
So I think the tech available is amazing. Every few months you see something come out, a new product come out, or something that you think, this is great.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm always thinking, when you go along, you listen to a new piece of tech, a new platform, new product, whatever it might be, is it solving? Do we have that problem? So, it looks great, but is it actually going to solve an issue that we have? And I've trialed various things over the last few years, and it looks great, give it a trial, and actually the results aren't maybe quite what you need. Others, you trial it, it's incredible, and that becomes, your new platform for sourcing or whatever it might be. So
yeah,
I think kind of taking it back to the point we were talking about earlier on data and insights. If you're collecting the right information and your recruiters are using your systems in the right way, and you can really, really pull that great data and those great insights out from what you're doing now, you can start to identify your challenges. And then you can start to look at the market and say, okay, what's out there? What new tech, what new platforms are there that could help us deal with that specific challenge? And I think it's very easy to get quite excited about all these new things that are available. But actually, if you drill down and get the data piece right in the first place, you'll start to see what's really going to enhance your process, what's going to make your recruiters' lives easier, what's going to get you to hire that candidate maybe quicker, or better quality candidates, depending on what your challenge is. And I remember at the time thinking the data was, something really painful, and all these reports and dashboards would come up and, really drive performance. But actually now that's exactly what I've been building in previous roles, and exactly what I use now to look at, how do we make decisions? And I think that's certainly the way I approach it. I think there's some incredible tools out there that have come into the market in the last few years. I quite like the insights tools you can use. So I know there's Horsefly, and there's LinkedIn Talent Insights, which really give you that kind of ground information and that data to start your search from. The way messaging platforms are going, so moving away from kind of spamming candidates maybe just through LinkedIn, or using that as your primary channel to start these messaging and more conversation platforms, particularly for tech talent.
Yeah.
These are amazing and innovations that are really kind of moving candidate sourcing forward. There's lots of exciting stuff out there, but I'd probably always try and look at what your challenge is first before implementing anything that might not work for you, I suppose. I don't know if I even answered the question there, actually.
No, I actually think that's a really good answer, because you're so right. There's a lot of platforms out there and they all do great things, and actually you could get so easily sucked up into like, I'll just have it all, but actually what are you as a company? Who are you looking for to join you? Where do they hang out? What's the key message? Understanding all of that before you go in, and just kind of go on every platform or take up every piece of software, whatever it might be. That is a very strategic and good response. So no, I think that's a really good piece of advice for anyone that's watching and is thinking, what do I need to stand out, to stay ahead, etc. Okay, so that kind of brings us nearly to a close, but what I wanted to do, and I'm putting you a bit on the spot, so apologies, but let's just assume that everyone's looking ahead to 2022 and thinking, oh my goodness, where do I start? What's the priority? Where am I going with this? What would be sort of the three main things, I suppose, that you would say, think about these things, prioritize these things, and you won't go too far wrong?
It's a great question. Right, we'll give this a go. What would my three things be? I think getting the right team in place, and this is a huge challenge right now, certainly one that I know lots and lots of people are experiencing. Hiring recruiters is tough, really tough.
Yeah.
But without plugging chapter 2 too hard, there are other solutions out there. So looking at your team, looking at who you need, looking at, we touched on earlier how difficult it is to know what that workforce plan is going to look like moving forwards, but trying to get a grip of, what might that look like? What does the team need to look like?
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to start with, that you have the right recruiters, that you have the right team structure, and whether that is using partners to help you, or whether it's an in-house team, whatever's right for your company. But I definitely think that's where you need to start. Do you need employer brand specialists? Do you need somebody that's focusing just on talent pipelining? You'll know what's right for your organization. So I think that's definitely the place to start. I then think looking at the data, looking at your processes, making sure that you've got that solid foundation is, again, it's kind of makes sense logically to make sure that you're in that space. You can start to identify some pain points, some areas you need to focus on, look at what tech's out there, like we've said. And then I think the final piece would be start to think about how you can really give candidates an insight into your company. How do you promote yourself? And lots of companies have done really cost-effective, videos on phones and really authentic pieces of, maybe blogs, or there's loads of ways to do it. It doesn't have to be a super expensive company video. It doesn't have to be a massive campaign, but start to think about how you really promote yourselves as an employer of choice. And what would a candidate want to know? Like, what are the best bits about working at your organization? Or why has somebody stayed for 10 years and moved around 3 different roles? Or, talk about their stories. People who work part-time, promote your employees and promote those people who work for you. So I think they're my 3.
Yeah, definitely.
On the spot.
Authenticity there as well is like my favorite word. You can spend a fortune on a video when you can tell it's models in the picture or whatever, and actually having something that's a little bit more cost effective but is very authentic, and it's a genuine insight into your world, then I think that people take the latter far more at face value. So no, that's brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much. Honestly, I've loved having you on. I'm so glad that I finally convinced you to join me, and it's been a blast. I think you've added some amazing insights for anybody who's kind of thinking about next year, what their challenges might be and how they might be able to overcome them. So yes, thank you so much again, Charlotte, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.